Hi, welcome to the RDR demonstration for the System Administration course. In this how-to video tutorial, we're going to focus on ReliableDR. We're going to look at the installation, the system setup focusing on security, creating organizations, managing your profiles, adding the servers you want to connect to. And we're also going to take a look at creating the Unitrends RDR jobs, focusing on adding application tests and how do you modify existing jobs. We're also going to show you how to view the compliance reports that are generated from the RDR system. You have ReliableDR, remote desktop connection. You log in as our Unitrends 1 capital U username and password there for the administrator. And this ReliableDR session, let me move it to the middle of my screen for everybody here. In this desktop session, under your File Explorer, you'll be able to go to 192.168.100.10. On that apps volume that we've been backing up all week, under the Unitrends folder, there's an RDR subfolder. All right, but that's our installation. We're going to take that install file and we're going to copy it to our desktop. You're going to run it from the virtual machine that you're going to install RDR on. There's our installer. Pretty easy to download. So again, you get a 30-day trial, full featured, from the day you download it. So make sure you register it right away and take advantage of your settings and creating jobs and all that we're going to do next. Start that process right away. And we're just going to go ahead and launch from the ReliableDR server the ReliableDR exe installer. It's going to go through some other installations for the .NET framework. It will install SQL if you prompt it to, if you don't already have a SQL installed here, or you can use a network instance of SQL. We're just going to clear that off. But it will install SQL if you tell it to install SQL. If you don't have a network version of SQL or SQL is not already installed on your server, it will install IIS if IIS is not installed and detected on this server as well too. So it will go through some prerequisite checks before it actually can do the installation. It does need to be running Windows 2008 or greater. So it can be any 2008 R2, any 2012, 2012 R2. Just can't be running on Windows 7, Windows 8, 2003. Doesn't work. All right, so here we can see our installer is ready to continue, so we're just going to hit Next to continue. You can see it's asking us for our installation directory. We're just going to leave these default for today, but obviously if your installation requires you to move these, you can. So you can change the installation path. We're going to leave them default for today. Here's where it's prompting me to either use a local SQL Server instance, and it will install one if SQL is not installed, or I can use a network version of SQL as well too with an existing ReliableDR database. That's the key. It has to have an existing ReliableDR database. We have a SQL server, but it's not running ReliableDR, right? So we are going to go ahead and use a local SQL Server instance. It's going to install SQL Server for us. It's now going to go through some prerequisite checks. It's going to check IIS to see if it's got the newest version of IIS 7 or greater. And it's going to check the .NET Framework 3.5. I can see there it's passed the IIS server version 7 or greater. Now it's checking the .NET Framework 3.5. I can see here now that it's passed the .NET Framework 3.5 test, and I can go ahead and click Next to continue. At this point, it's asking us to configure the ports. We need to choose all ports that are needed. We need both an open HTTP port and a secure port. You may already have other web services running on this server. I recommend using a standalone RDR server. Go ahead and validate the default ports and take those over. Going to validate that we can use them. It does prompt us and say that 80 is currently in use. Would I like to keep this port? If you continue without choosing another current site, will be stopped, enabled, right? I would like to keep this port, yes. I want to go ahead and use port 80 and port 443. ReliableDR is going to be the only thing that we're going to run on this server through IIS. Now it's going to go ahead and install the SQL instance that it needs. This will take a few minutes as well, so we'll go ahead and time lapse. Okay, now we can see it's gone through the SQL installation piece, and it's now copying files to start the installation for ReliableDR. It's now completed the copying of those files, and we're now just waiting on the required application configuration changes to happen. We'll go ahead and time-lapse this as well for you. So now we can see our installation is finished. So inside of our interface here, we can go ahead and say finished here, and we're all done on the ReliableDR server itself, so we can actually close that remote desktop session. And right inside of our Internet Explorer interface, we're going to open up a brand new tab here, and we're going to go to the ReliableDR IP address 192.168.100.15. We're going to go to that IP address. It's going to take just a couple minutes for that interface to come up, so we'll go ahead and time-lapse that for you too. I don't know why, but for the first time you launch into it, it takes a few minutes to start it up or do something in the background. Once you start going to it, it seems to go to it faster, but we'll go ahead and time-lapse this for a minute because it will take about a minute or two for you. We've now got the interface opened up on the web browser here, Internet Explorer going to 100.15, which is our ReliableDR address, and the default username and password is admin and password. Admin and password, lowercase p. All right, you can see here in the interface once we're in, you can see my systems up at the top and jobs, my RTO and RPO compliance. I've got evaluation for 29 days remaining. I can see who I'm logged in as up here. We're going to start to cover some of this stuff. So it's pretty much just like our UEB a little bit. You've got your main menu at the top here. You'll see all your actions and stuff at the top up here. You've got your navigation tree for the different jobs we're going to create and our infrastructure once we tie to it. And you'll also see different values and different options out here kind of under the main stage. You've also got a little compliance banner over here. We'll show you how to use that as we get some jobs running a little bit later on as well too. But pretty simple interface you'll see. You know, the buttons up here are kind of hard to see sometimes, but you know, you'll figure it out when we get in there and start creating jobs and start looking at creating our infrastructure and our organization, tying to our servers so we can see and create those jobs for those virtual snapshots. Okay, but the installation's good. User interface looks good. We'll go ahead and show you the next section. We're going to go ahead and start taking a look at security. Now, when we look at security, there's a couple of ways to get to it. It is under settings and users. From inside of here, I can manage my different users, my default admin account right here, and I can set the password and change the password from right up here as well too. Either way you want to do this, you can edit the account from here and change the password from here as well too. Right, so we are going to make this Unitrends 1 capital U our default password that we've been using all week as well too. So I type that in twice, and I'll save that account. I'm also going to go up here to plus sign here, and I'm going to go to a new local user, and you can also tie to your Active Directory just like UEB can, just like our Recovery Series appliances can. I'm going to make my own user account with my first initial and last name. I'm going to set my password to the default Unitrends 1 with a capital U. Type it in twice to verify it. Additional information, you can fill that out. There we go. I'll leave the phone blank. But there's my additional administrator account. I could log out and back in as my own user. All right, but I'm going to go ahead and just stay logged in as the admin for now. All right, once again, you could tie to Active Directory and pull an Active Directory account in, creating ReliableDR groups. Check the administrator guide for installation of ReliableDR for how that Active Directory tie-in works. We're first going to go to our organization tab down here in our navigation tree, and we're going to click the plus sign to create our first organization. Or our organization, we're going to go ahead and call it, just like we did in class, UT Training Company. The short name we're going to call it is just going to be Training. We're just going to go ahead and save this organization for now. Very simple to create an organization. And this organization, when we start to use it, if you have VMware resources that you want to delegate out, we're going to tie into these here within a few minutes, but you can start to delegate those out. So we're going to actually do a right click on this organization, and we're going to manage it. What you'll notice is at the top here now, it now says UT Training Company, and now I'm able to add servers and infrastructure from within inside of this organization. This would be a company that our DR as a service would be managing. This would be their template for failover. Could be an organization within a business unit, right? You may break these out however you need to help organize your overall DR plan. We're in our web interface once again, and we're in our organization for UT Training Company, and we're going to go to our infrastructure, and we're going to add servers first. And there's that plus sign up there hidden in the corner once again. We're going to go ahead and click that plus sign, and we'll tie to VMware first. Here we're just going to type the name of our ESXi host and the address. Down at the bottom, we're going to use that username we've been using all week, which is administrator and Unitrends 1 with a capital U. We'll go ahead and test this connection. Server connectivity successfully tested. So we hit OK here, and then we'll save that profile. We'll add that server connection to our ESX environment off-site. All right, this is connected to our ReliableDR running on a target environment within VMware off-site. Now we're also going to add another server to Unitrends Recovery Series or UEB. This would be connected to our target, not our local source. Make sure you tie to your target. Make sure you're using your target address of 100.199. This is our root account, which is root and Unitrends 1 capital U. This is making a direct connection to the Recovery Series API basically, so it can do instant recovery from the virtual snapshots from within UEB, in our case, to VMware. It has to be registered to these two for it to work. Now we also support Hyper-V. For our purposes today, we're only going to be testing VMware and our UEB. Once again, Hyper-V works, and there is support for Recovery Series and UEB. Both of those solutions work as well too. We are testing UEB on VMware for this course. Once again, over in our remote desktop session, we're back on our web browser on the IP address for ReliableDR. We're logged in as our admin, Unitrends 1Password. We've added our servers successfully. We secured our appliance. We created our UT training organization. Now we're ready to start modifying our service profile, which is going to tell our system what our recovery points are. Now I like to take this first one here and go ahead and edit it. And I like to take a best practice kind of that we learned in UEB training for black belt. In green belt we learn it, is to use a name that makes a little bit more sense in here. So I like to use like RPO, and then I'll put in, if it's 1 day and 30 minutes, I'll put in 1 day, 30 minutes. And the 30 minutes I'll separate with an RTO. It's a 1-day RPO and a 30-minute RTO. And I'll save that as my default kind of group. There is no such thing as a default, by the way. We're going to add another service profile. And this service profile is going to be an RPO of 12 hours. We're going to make this 12. And we're going to do an RTO of 1 hour. And we're going to save that profile. Now this 1 day, 30 minutes right here, that really actually doesn't make sense. So let's go ahead and edit this. And we're going to change this 30 minutes out here on the RPO. And instead of 30 minutes, if we're only backing it up, once a day, the RTO on it is probably more like 4 hours. So we're going to set this thing to 4 hour RTO and save that group. Now we're going to create another service profile. We're going to have 3 in here total. We're going to do an RPO of 6 hours here for the RPO, and we're going to do 30 minutes. This makes a little bit more sense for the RTO. We'll save that group. Right, so usually what you'll see is that the more often you back up a server, the tighter your recovery point objective, the quicker your RTO requirements are. Right, so if we're backing up every 6 hours, that thing probably has to be up within like 30 minutes. Every 12 hours, maybe an hour. If it's only once a day, it's probably out there in the 4-hour mark. All right, so those are the service profiles telling the jobs that we're getting ready to create, what these servers can fail over, and what their compliance requirements are. Those are called service profiles. All right, we're going to go up to the jobs area. Once again, make sure you're on your organization before you start to create jobs in here. We're going to go into all jobs. And now in our main stage, we can see that plus sign that we're looking for. Go ahead and create our first job in here. We're going to be using the Unitrends replicated backup jobs. But just for you guys, just so you know, ReliableDR can also use its own built-in replication. It can use storage-based array replication, and it can use certified replicas right through VMware as well too. Right? Any type of replicated backups through these sources can work. We're going to be using Unitrends backup today. You can see our target environment, which is our Unitrends, and I can see my ESXi host. I'm going to match those two up. Obviously, in a more complex environment, you have to pay attention to what you have and where you're going. Here I can see the list of the VMs that I've replicated. I don't see my web server. I don't see the RDR server over here. I have not replicated those machines. But I can put machines into a group one at a time. In this case, I'm going to do my domain controller by itself. You can see my resources here, so I can point it to my data center that contains the local host that I want to go to. From that local host, I can go to my data store, and I can choose the network, which in our case is the private network. In the test network, I want to also set the private network. Go ahead and go to the next step. Here's where we can go ahead and build a schedule for this. If you have to test this compliance once a week, every other week, you can start to do those types of schedules. It's pretty cool. All right, we're just going to set ours to run on demand. We don't have our labs for long enough to schedule these things anyways. Here we're just going to call this name, we're going to call it our domain services. The domain server should be in the 6-hour, 30-minute RPO group. 6-hour RPO and 30-minute RTO group. We're going to make it pause on error, so if it does error, we can see why it did error out before it shuts everything back down. That way we don't have to go look in the logs. We'll go ahead and create this group or this job. Now that does a basic kind of recovery test. It's just going to test it to see if it can power up, and it's going to test to see if it can reach the OS. That's it. Very basic tests. All right, we're going to create another job here right away. We're going to use Unitrends backup again. We're going to line up our resources here. Once again, we'll see the list of our virtual machines that we can group together. In this case, I'm just going to do the Exchange server. We'll go ahead and point these resources to our local host and our data store off that host. We'll select the private network for both of these networks for testing and live, and we're not using VM folders once again. We're not going to schedule any of our stuff here, but we are going to go ahead and give this one a name, and we're going to call it our mail services. Could be more than one server. The mail services, we're going to go ahead and put in that 6-hour, 30-minute RPO group as well, and we do want to pause it if there is an error. We'll go ahead and create another group or another job using Unitrends once again. Line up our resources. In this case, we're going to do the SQL server. And we're going to choose those resources once again. Both on the private network. Once again, if you have multiple networks, you can create your own test environment, your own sandbox through VMware, and point your tests network to that VLAN, that different network. That way you can get to the different machines between the machines if they need to communicate for the services to work as well too. This one is our SQL services, so I'm going to call this our DB services. And we'll go ahead and put this in the 1 day 4 hour. Last group we're going to create, I think we got one more. It's going to be our file server. All right, so it's going to be our file server. And we'll choose those resources once again. Once again, we're not going to schedule any of our backup or our failover jobs, our tests. This one we're going to call our file services. We're going to go ahead and put this one in our this is our 12-hour RPO and 1-hour RTO. I try to put one in each group out here, and I've got at least one in each group. All right, that's how we create the jobs. Pretty easy to create. I'll show you how to manage them next. We can see the jobs that we created. We'll just start right at the top here. If I want to manage that DB services job, I can double click it to go into that job. You'll see it come up here at the top of my main stage. You can see the summary of it. I have not ran this job yet. You can see the options down here, the service profile group that it's in. I've got it power on at 15-minute timeout, and it will pause on air. I can see the resources that it's pointed to down here as well, too, when I created this job. I can also edit both of these settings. Now, I can also go into the job, and I can add and remove virtual machines into this group. Right now, we only kind of have one of each of these servers, but you get into large environments, and they have multiple database servers, multiple domain servers, multiple file servers, mail servers, application servers in different groups. You're going to see larger environments, different kind of group strategies. Now, these virtual machines, you can right-click on any virtual machine within a group, and you can manage the options for the test for that virtual machine. You can change the boot order, whether or not you want it to power on during the test or not, if it's one of the critical machines in the group, what the network settings are like as well, too. That's pretty cool to be able to change that. Reconfiguring the site recovery option resources, that's pointing at whether it's a UEB target 1, target 2, target 3, depending on if you have more than one appliance. And then the application tests are really cool. Being able to come in and say, yes, this is a SQL server, and I'm going to use a default credential in here. I'm going to add a new account, and we're going to make this our default administrator in Unitrends 1. And we'll just say local admin. And we'll save that account. That's pretty much our default account for a lot of our machines. Okay, now in the actions here, I have to create first an application test. So here you'll see a list of all the tests we can provide, and knowing that this is a SQL server, I can go down and say, hey, let's do a query check, or let's just check the service, make sure the service is running. What's the service name, right? In our case, I think it's just SharePoint or something like that, or it might be looking for the actual SQL writer or something. You can test anything you want, whatever service name you want. Okay, so you can put those tests in as well. Let's go ahead and do SharePoint here. We'll go ahead and save this into our test. All right, we'll go ahead and save that option. Now, if I want to run this job, I can go to all jobs up here. I can highlight the job or group of machines that I want to fail over. And I can go to actions, and I can run a test on that group, on that server in this case. What you'll notice this job is going to do is start to fail over my SQL server inside of VMware here. It's doing the instant recovery audit mode that UEB can do and that our recovery series can do from the virtual snapshots. It's orchestrating all that for you based on your job. If there's multiple servers in the group, once again, you can change the boot order. You can see it's creating the instant recovery store now. It's going to create our new SQL server here within a couple of minutes with SQL SharePoint 1.replica. That's the name we're using under that machine. We can watch the job from here also. There's the new machine showing up there. And you can watch the failover status from here. It's going to go through all of those checks. It's going to power on. Does it power on? Yes. Can it reach the OS? Yes. How long did it take to reach the OS? That's your compliance to tell it if it's up, if you don't run any more tests. In this one, we're running a SQL test, so it will try to run a query to the SQL server, to that instance, that service. I'm not sure if we have the right name or not, but we'll see it. It might time out. It might not find the right name. We'll find out when it runs that test. But it's very easy to put in those can tests and find out exactly if your application is working, not just the OS. So we'll go ahead and let this time lapse so you can watch this job fail over for a little bit. All right, we can see here that my remote desktop session, or my console session, excuse me, for RDR, or for my database server, is up. It's Control-Alt-Delete to log in here. So it has been replicated. It has been powered on virtually instant recovery from the replicated backups. It's up and running, and now we're just kind of waiting on RDR to finish its testing back here, waiting on the OS response, it says. So now it's just waiting on the OS response. While this server is failing over, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this job right here. Let me see if I can get my console to respond here. There it goes. And we're going to go ahead and run the mail services job. We'll go ahead and run a test against that one. So this is going to power on my Exchange Server 1 virtual snapshot from the replicated UEB to the ESXi host. Over here, once again, I'll see a cloned version of Exchange Server 1.replica powered on within a few minutes. We can also look over here and we can minimize this tab as well, or we can view the running jobs. Up here in the corner, you'll see your compliance, history, running jobs, and scheduled tasks. Right? We want running jobs. Here's the currently 2 running jobs. If I want to look back at the DB services, I can do a right click on it and I can view that job again. I can see where it's at in the status. Here I can see it reached the OS, but it failed that script service test we put in there. Okay, so we'll close that job out. I'll do a right click on my mail services job, and we can watch this one for a few minutes. Remember, we did not configure any advanced settings or tests in here, so it should be just checking to see if it can reach the OS and see if it's powered up within its compliance time. While this job is still running here, I actually just noticed that this job is paused because we have that setting to pause on air. So I can go ahead and hit continue right here. That will continue that job, which will then tear down that replica of the SQL server. So you'll see in the actions here that it will start to remove that SQL SharePoint 1 replica machine. It's going to power it off, and then it's going to remove it from the inventory. You can see here at the bottom of the output that the backup date and time of 6/25 at 8 o'clock last night does not meet the recovery point objective. It has a warning because it is not meeting the recovery point objective. The backup date is too old. We need to move this server to a more frequent schedule based on the recovery group that it's in right now. If I go back over now to reports, I'll see my RTO and compliance report. If I click on that report, I can now see that nothing is in compliance. And I've ran a test against this group right here. I've ran one test and nothing was compliant yet. All failures. I can see the history over here of the job that I did run. Once again, I can view that output again and I can see why it's not compliant. All right, we're going to go back to our jobs. We're going to take the file services and we're going to run a test across it. We'll start that one up. I can watch this job run from here. And once again, over in VMware, I'll see that it cleaned up my SQL SharePoint 1 replica, and now my DC Exchange server replica is powering on. That's the other live test or job that I'm running right now. So if I go back here to active jobs, there's my two running jobs. They're both still running. I can right click and view these jobs. Mail services is still waiting on a response from the OS. And it looks like the file server is just about there with it. Here I can see the file server 1 replica has been created and powered on. It's waiting for the response from the OS here as well. So here we can see both of our jobs are done. The mail services job was all finished and all compliant, so it tore itself down. But the file services, you can see another RPO compliance failure here. The backup window is not frequent enough, so this is not meeting its recovery point objective. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and continue this job here so it can tear this machine down as well too. Okay, so we're going to do a close these both out, go back to our running jobs, and I think they both might be already torn down. Let's take a look inside of VMware and see here. And I can see they're both torn down. There's no .replica machines inside of here, so we should be all set. All right, so if you go over and look at our reports, and we take a look inside of our compliance report once again, we've now ran machines, and we have certain machines that are compliant. You can see the mail services are 100% compliant. It met the 30-minute RTO, and it met its 6-hour RPO, 5 hours and 22 minutes old, and it took 10 minutes and 26 seconds to bring it up, and it had 30 minutes. All right, so the mail server is compliant, and the file server, it failed its RPO because it's 1 day and 4 hours, and it should be every 12 hours. So we need to either move this to a more frequent backup schedule or change this to a different service profile group. Okay, domain services, we haven't ran any tests yet. And here it failed the check on SQL databases, so it didn't even register the test. All right. If we go back to our jobs, we click on this DB job, we go into the virtual machine in here. We'll go ahead and remove this SQL test from inside of here. So we're going to go to application tests. We'll go ahead and highlight this SQL test in here for now, and we'll tell it to remove that test. We'll go ahead and save this so there's no custom test in this job anymore. And we'll go ahead and fail this over one more time to see if we can see how it is on compliance for RPO and RTO, just to test the OS then. So let's go ahead and run that test. And we'll watch that run from here. All right, here we can see the compliance tests are all done. So we'll go over to our reports. Go to our RPO, RTO compliance report. And now we can see that the DB services is in compliance. Our file server is still out of compliance. Once again, we got to run that new backup. And our mail servers is in compliance. Pretty easy software to maintain. Just got to think a little bit more advanced, bigger groups, bigger organizations, bigger servers inside of the groups. It'll test each server in that group, not just one server per group like we have here in our little tiny lab. You will get email reports every time a backup compliance job runs. You will get a breakdown of that job and what happened. And you will get daily summaries, weekly summaries as well from the appliance too,